The story revolves around Jack Marsh, a police officer in a southern town called Willow Creek, which is deeply divided by race. While on a routine patrol, Jack brutally assaults a young black man, Malik Carter, unaware that the boy is his son, the product of a secret relationship he had with Leah Carter, a black woman, 20 years ago. The town erupts in protests demanding justice, while Jack faces the collapse of his career and reputation. Leah, who kept Malik's paternity a secret to protect him, now struggles with the decision to reveal the truth or continue to hide her past. The conflict between the town's deep-rooted racism and the pursuit of justice intensifies, forcing Jack and Leah to confront their choices and the devastating impact they will have on their lives. In the heart of Willow Creek, a small southern town simmering with unspoken tensions, a single moment of unchecked violence changes everything. Officer Jack Marsh has always walked a fine line between duty and prejudice, upholding the law as he sees it, one that favors his kind and punishes those who fall outside it. But when a routine patrol spirals out of control, Jack brutally assaults a young black boy, Malik Carter, in front of a horrified crowd. The town erupts in outrage, and Jack's name becomes synonymous with hatred and brutality. What no one, not even Jack, realizes is that Malik is his son. 20 years ago, Jack had a forbidden affair with Leah Carter, a black woman whose love he buried beneath layers of shame and denial. Leah never told him about Malik, raising her son in secret to protect him from the very man who now stands accused of destroying his life. But as the truth begins to unravel, Jack is forced to confront his past, and the devastating realization that the child he nearly killed in the street is his own blood. As the town divides along racial lines, Jack's world crumbles, and he is left to face the bitter legacy of his actions. Can he find a way to make amends, or will the weight of his past crush any hope of redemption? Meanwhile, Leah must wrestle with whether to expose Jack's paternity and risk destroying her son's sense of self, or keep the secret and protect Malik from the man who hurt him. Physical description: Jack is a tall, broad-shouldered white man in his early 40s with graying brown hair and a rugged face marked by years of stress. His piercing blue eyes convey an intensity that often intimidates others, and his posture is always stiff, a reflection of his rigid worldview. Backstory: born and raised in Willow Creek, Jack followed in the footsteps of his father and grandfather, both officers who believed in keeping order in a racially divided town. He inherited their values and their role in the community, building a career on being tough but fair, though his biases run deep. His life begins to unravel after he assaults Malik, a boy he doesn't know is his son. Jack's journey involves confronting his past, his prejudices, and the buried guilt of an affair with Leah Carter 2 decades earlier. Physical description: Leah is a graceful, strong-willed black woman in her late 30s with dark, curly hair that falls just past her shoulders. She has warm brown eyes that show both resilience and a deep sadness. Her slender frame hides a quiet strength born from years of hardship. Backstory: Leah grew up in Willow Creek, aware of the racial barriers but determined to overcome them. Her secret teenage romance with Jack Marsh ended in heartbreak, and when she discovered she was pregnant with Malik, she decided to raise him alone. Leah has built a life for herself and her son as a respected community advocate, always putting Malik's safety first. Her secret about Malik's father weighs heavily on her, and when Jack assaults Malik, she faces the painful dilemma of whether to reveal the truth or continue shielding her son. Physical description: Malik is a bright, energetic 10-year-old boy with light brown skin and soft, curly hair. He's slightly shorter than most boys his age, but carries himself with a confidence that belies his age. His wide, innocent eyes often show a curiosity about the world. Backstory: Malik is Leah's pride and joy, a boy with a love for school and a natural athleticism. He's largely unaware of the racial tensions in Willow Creek, having been shielded by his mother. When he is violently attacked by Jack, the event leaves him emotionally scarred and confused, particularly when he learns that the man who hurt him is his biological father. Malik's story is one of resilience as he comes to terms with the complex relationships between race, identity, and family. Physical description: in his mid-50s, Tom is a stout, weathered white man with thinning hair and a grizzled face. His posture reflects a life spent in service, and his green eyes are sharp but often shadowed with weariness. Backstory: Sheriff Walters has been a lifelong friend of Jack's family and holds conservative views, though he's uncomfortable with the town's racial divisions. After the incident, he is torn between his loyalty to Jack and the demands for justice from the community. Tom serves as both an ally and an obstacle, representing the old guard that clings to outdated values, while quietly questioning the system he's upheld for decades. Description: The town square is the center of life in Willow Creek, with its historic courthouse, small shops, and a bronze statue of the town's founding sheriff. The square has witnessed both community celebrations and deep divisions. After Malik's attack, it becomes a battleground for protests and rallies, symbolizing the clash between the old order and the demand for change. Description: A modest but cozy single-story house on the outskirts of town. The exterior is painted soft blue, with a small porch where Malik often plays. Inside, the house is filled with warm, earthy tones, and family photos line the walls. It's a safe haven for Leah and Malik, though it becomes a place of difficult conversations and emotional confrontations as the truth about Jack is revealed. Description: A squat, brick building that exudes authority and control. The station is filled with outdated equipment, a reflection of the town's resistance to change. It's where Jack and other officers gather, a symbol of the system that upholds Willow Creek's racial hierarchy. As the investigation unfolds, it becomes a center of tension, where secrets are both buried and exposed. Description: A classic, old-fashioned diner near the town square where locals gather to gossip and share news. The interior is worn but welcoming, with vinyl booths and the smell of coffee always in the air. It's a microcosm of Willow Creek, where divides between races and classes are palpable but unspoken. After the incident, it becomes a place where opinions on Jack and the assault are debated, revealing the town's deep fractures. Description: Malik's school, a typical elementary school on the edge of town, is where he spends his carefree days before the attack. The playground, with its swings and jungle gym, is where Malik plays with his friends, a symbol of his lost innocence. After the assault, it becomes a place of awkwardness and whispers, as his peers struggle to understand what happened to him. Hospital emergency room, frantic and overwhelmed. Leah arrives at the hospital and is told that Malik is in critical condition. Doctors begin to assess him for internal injuries. Leah's emotional state deteriorates as she waits for news, her mind filled with guilt, fear, and anger. A nurse offers her a seat, but she cannot sit still. Purpose: Leah's love for Malik and her terror of losing him are highlighted, raising the emotional stakes. This scene also begins to reveal Leah's internal conflict over whether she should tell the truth about Malik's father. As Leah paces the hospital, a crowd begins to form outside in support of Malik, with local activists and neighbors gathering in protest. Police station, interrogation room. Jack sits in a cold, sterile room, awaiting interrogation. His hands shake as he replays the attack in his mind, trying to justify it to himself, but knowing deep down that he has crossed a line. He feels like his career is slipping away and knows that his reputation in the city may never recover. This scene deepens Jack's self-doubt and begins his internal conflict. He is still in denial about his actions, but the realization of the gravity of what he has done is beginning to hit him. Jack's attorney arrives to represent him, signaling that the legal battle and public scrutiny are about to begin. Willow Creek and beyond, people watch the viral video. The video of Jack's attack on Malik goes viral on social media. Clips of the footage are shown on news stations, and hashtags like #JusticeForMalik trend across the country. Protests begin to form across the city, drawing national media attention. This scene establishes the larger social impact of the event, showing how the attack has become a symbol of racial injustice, not just for the city, but for the country. The protests also heighten tension in Willow Creek, setting the stage for larger confrontations. The camera pans to the crowd gathered outside the hospital as local leaders prepare to speak. Leah watches this from the hospital window, a storm of emotions building inside her. Malik's hospital room. Malik awakens, disoriented and in pain. He remembers fragments of the attack and is frightened and confused. Leah rushes to his side, comforting him, But the sight of her son hurt and in pain fills her with fury toward Jack. Malik's innocence contrasts with the violence he has experienced as he asks Leah why this happened. This scene reestablishes Malik as the heart of the story, a symbol of innocence shattered by violence. Leah's protective instincts deepen and her desire for justice solidifies. Leah, with a mixture of anger and helplessness, tells Malik to rest while she prepares to leave the room. Outside, she resolves to do something, but is still unsure whether revealing the truth about Jack is the right choice. The town's response setting, Willow Creek Town Square. The protests outside the hospital grow. Some townspeople call for justice for Malik, while others defend Jack, claiming he was just doing his job. Divisions along racial lines become apparent, and tensions rise as opposing sides clash in heated debates and arguments. This scene shows how deeply ingrained the town's racial tensions are. The divide between those who support Jack and those who demand justice for Malik becomes a central theme in the narrative, foreshadowing the unraveling of the community. Leah arrives at the protest, preparing to confront the town and demand justice for her son. Hospital courtyard, outside the growing protest. Leah steps forward to address the crowd. Her voice shakes with emotion as she speaks of Malik's innocence and the injustice done to him. The crowd cheers her on, but she feels the weight of her hidden secret, that Jack, the man who hurt her son, is his father. She holds back from revealing it, knowing it would change everything. This moment marks Leah's first public stand for justice, establishing her as a key figure in the community's fight for Malik. It also creates tension as she continues to hide the truth about Malik's paternity, creating an emotional toll. As Leah finishes her speech, reporters ask her about Jack. Leah's lips tighten and she steps away, undecided about whether or not to reveal the truth. Jack's reckoning with his father. Jack's family home. Jack returns home and has a tense conversation with his father, who dismisses the gravity of what happened and tells Jack to stand his ground. His father's racist beliefs and old-world values come to the fore, reinforcing Jack's internal struggle as he begins to question everything he's been taught. This scene deepens Jack's story, showing the influence of his father and the generational racism that has shaped his worldview. Jack's struggle between loyalty to his upbringing and the growing realization that he is wrong begins to take root. Jack leaves his father's home, feeling lost and conflicted, and heads to a bar to drown his sorrows. Leah's struggle setting. Leah's home. Leah sits at the kitchen table, staring at an old photograph of her and Jack from years ago. Memories of their secret relationship flood her mind. She is conflicted. Telling Malik the truth would change her life, but keeping it a secret means Jack may never face the full consequences of his actions. This scene sets up Leah's emotional and moral conflict. She is torn between protecting her son and exposing the truth about Jack, deepening her character's internal struggle and adding layers of complexity to the narrative. Transition. Leah's phone rings. It's a lawyer offering to represent her and Malik in a civil lawsuit against Jack. She hesitates, but agrees to meet. Jack's arrest setting. Jack's home and the police station. Jack is officially arrested when charges of excessive force and racial profiling are filed against him. His once supportive fellow officers begin to distance themselves, feeling the tide turning against him. Jack is embarrassed and defiant, unsure whether to apologize or double down. Jack's fall from grace is depicted in this scene. He begins to see the consequences of his actions, but he is not yet fully accepting responsibility. This scene also shows how his reputation in the city is deteriorating. Jack is released on bail, and his lawyer warns him that things will get much worse if he does not find a way to defend himself. Leah meets the lawyer setting, a local law firm. Leah meets with a civil rights attorney who explains the legal options available to her. They can file a civil lawsuit against Jack and the police department for damages, and Leah is encouraged to make a public statement. Leah feels overwhelmed, realizing that pursuing this will put her entire life and Malik's in the spotlight. Leah's journey to seek justice is formalized. The lawyer's presence represents the legal and systemic challenge she is about to face, adding new layers of conflict to the story. Leah agrees to go ahead with the lawsuit, but remains undecided about revealing Malik's paternity. The late afternoon sun cast a golden glow over Willow Creek, a quaint southern town with its sleepy streets and friendly faces. Officer Jack Marsh's patrol car rolled slowly down the main road, passing the familiar landmarks, the old diner, the courthouse, and the statue of Sheriff Monroe, a tribute to the town's deep roots in law and order. Jack gripped the steering wheel, his fingers tight with the tension he carried daily. It was supposed to be an ordinary day, another slow shift, but the knot in his gut told him otherwise. The radio crackled with static before dispatch's voice came through, announcing a disturbance in the town square. Jack responded quickly, turning the car toward the center of town. His mind drifted, as it often did, to the legacy he carried. His father, his grandfather, both pillars of Willow Creek law enforcement, men who believed in keeping things under control. Jack prided himself on upholding that tradition, but deep down, he wrestled with the growing discomfort he felt toward the racial divisions that had always defined the town. As Jack pulled into the square, he saw a small crowd gathered. His eyes narrowed on a group of boys, teenagers mostly, causing a ruckus near the statue. Among them, one stood out, a boy with light brown skin, a slight build, and curly hair. Malik Carter. Jack didn't know the boy well, but he had heard the name. He was Leah Carter's son. Jack stepped out of the car, adjusting his belt and squaring his shoulders. "Hey!" he called out, his voice gruff and authoritative. The boys turned to face him, their playful shoving immediately ceasing. Most of them scattered, but Malik stood his ground, eyes wide with defiance. Jack's jaw clenched. "You got something to say, kid?" Malik hesitated, then shook his head. "No, sir." The tension between them thickened, like the humid air that clung to everything that summer. Jack took a step forward, his hand brushing the baton at his side. "Move along. Now." Malik's eyes flicked toward the statue and back to Jack, the hesitation in his movements signaling something deeper. But before Jack could react, Malik turned and started walking away, his shoulders stiff with resentment. Jack watched him go, the tightness in his chest refusing to ease. Leah Carter sat at her kitchen table, staring out the window toward the road where Malik would soon be walking home. The house was quiet, filled with the warm afternoon light, but Leah's thoughts were anything but calm. Her son was growing up too fast, and in a town like Willow Creek, that worried her. She had worked so hard to shield him from the ugliness that simmered beneath the surface of this place. The sound of the front door creaking open startled her from her thoughts. Malik stepped inside, his face flushed from the heat and something else Leah couldn't quite place. "Hey, baby," she called softly. "Everything okay?" Malik shrugged, dropping his backpack by the door. "Ran into that cop Marsh in town," he said casually, but Leah could hear the tightness in his voice. Her heart skipped a beat. Jack Marsh. The name sent a ripple of anxiety through her. She hadn't seen him in years, not since they were teenagers sneaking around in the shadows, pretending their love could survive in a town that would never accept it. And he had no idea Malik was his son. "What happened?" Leah asked, trying to keep her voice steady. "Nothing," Malik replied, though his eyes betrayed the truth. "He told me to move along." "I did." Leah frowned, but she let it go. Malik was safe, at least for now. She stood and walked over to him, brushing a hand over his curls. "You hungry? I made your favorite, chicken and rice." Malik gave her a half smile, and for a moment, Leah could pretend that everything was fine. But as she watched her son sit down at the table, a quiet storm of fear and love churned inside her. She had kept the secret of Malik's father for so long, protecting him from the man who would never understand the beautiful boy he had left behind. The following afternoon, Jack was back on patrol, the weight of the previous day still gnawing at him. Something about that boy, Malik, had gotten under his skin. He wasn't sure if it was the way the kid had looked at him, or just the stress of being a cop in a town where nothing ever seemed to change. As Jack drove down Maple Street, he noticed a group of people gathered near the basketball courts. His pulse quickened. The familiar sense of dread tugged at him again. He parked his car and approached the crowd, seeing Malik in the middle of it, this time with a few other boys. "What's going on here?" Jack's voice boomed as he approached. The boys stopped, turning to see the officer striding toward them. Malik stood again, eyes locking onto Jack's with a flicker of something Jack couldn't quite read. Anger, Maybe fear or defiance. "I told you yesterday," Jack said, his voice low. "Don't cause trouble around here." "We're just playing ball," Malik replied, his voice steady but laced with an edge that set Jack off. "You think you can talk back to me?" Jack's hand was already on his baton, a reflex born out of years of dealing with situations like this. But something about Malik's expression, that quiet defiance, triggered something darker in Jack. Without thinking, without hesitating, he raised the baton. What happened next was a blur. Malik's friends scattered, shouts rang out, and Jack's baton swung down, connecting with the boy's side. Malik crumpled to the ground with a cry of pain, his arms shielding his head as Jack struck again, harder this time. "Get up," Jack shouted, his voice filled with a fury he couldn't control. But Malik didn't move. He lay there, curled in a ball, his breath coming in shallow, pained gasps. Jack took a step back, suddenly aware of the crowd forming around him, of the horrified faces staring at him, and of the silence that hung in the air like a lead weight. "What have I done?" The thought hit Jack like a freight train, but it was too late. The damage was done. Leah was folding laundry when her phone rang. She almost didn't answer, but something told her to pick it up. The voice on the other end was frantic. One of Malik's friends, telling her to come to the basketball courts, fast. Malik had been hurt. Her heart raced as she dropped everything and ran out the door, not caring that she was still in her house shoes, not caring about anything except her son. When she arrived, the scene was chaos. An ambulance was parked at the edge of the court, its lights flashing. A crowd had gathered, murmuring angrily, and in the center of it all, Leah saw her boy, her sweet, innocent Malik, lying on the ground, barely conscious. "Malik!" she screamed, rushing forward. The paramedics stopped her, but she fought them, desperate to hold her son. What happened? What did they do to him? Her eyes locked on Jack, standing a few feet away, his face pale and stricken. Leah's breath caught in her throat. It was him. Of all the people, it had to be him. The man who had once promised her the world, who had left her to raise their child alone, had now hurt that very child. She wanted to scream, to tear him apart, but all she could do was fall to her knees beside Malik, her hands trembling as she reached for him. "Baby, I'm here," she whispered. "I'm here." The fluorescent lights of the emergency room were harsh and cold, casting a sterile glow over everything. Leah sat in the waiting room, her heart pounding in her chest as she clenched her trembling hands in her lap. The faint hum of hospital machinery and distant voices buzzed in her ears, but all she could focus on was the image of Malik lying unconscious on the ground. Her son, her baby. She had been pacing when a nurse had gently told her to sit down, that the doctors were doing everything they could. Leah's legs had been shaking so badly that she had collapsed into the nearest chair, unable to find her voice. Her mind raced with guilt, anger, and fear. How could this have happened? How had Jack, of all people, hurt the one person Leah had spent her entire life protecting? A doctor entered the room, clipboard in hand, and Leah shot to her feet, her pulse quickening. "How is he? Is Malik going to be okay?" The doctor gave her a reassuring, but professional, smile. "He's stable, but he's in a lot of pain. We're running tests to check for internal injuries, but it seems like he'll recover physically." Physically? Leah's breath hitched as she tried to suppress a sob. "Can I see him?" The doctor nodded, leading her down the hallway to Malik's room. Leah's footsteps were heavy, her body weighed down by the gravity of the situation. She opened the door slowly, and there was her boy, lying in the hospital bed, pale and hooked up to machines, his eyes barely open. "Malik," she whispered, rushing to his side. She reached out to touch his hand, careful not to startle him. Malik's eyes fluttered open, and he turned his head slightly toward her. "Mom, what happened?" Leah swallowed the lump in her throat, fighting back the tears. "You were hurt, baby, but you're safe now. I'm here." Malik winced as he tried to move, his small frame trembling with pain. That cop, why did he do that? Leah's heart broke all over again. How could she explain to her son that the man who had attacked him was not just any cop, but his father? How could she tell Malik the truth now, when he was already so broken? I don't know, baby, she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. I don't know why. Across town, Jack sat in a small, sterile interrogation room, staring at the blank wall in front of him. His hands shook, but not from fear. He was still trying to justify what had happened in his head. He had been doing his job, hadn't he? Controlling the situation, keeping the peace? But every time he replayed the moment in his mind, something gnawed at him. The boy, Malik. There had been something about the way he looked at him, that familiar defiance mixed with fear. Jack hadn't realized how badly he had lost control until it was too late. His mind kept replaying the sound of the baton connecting with the boy's body, the way Malik had crumpled to the ground, the gasps from the crowd. He had crossed a line, and now, he wasn't sure how to go back. The door opened, and Sheriff Walters stepped into the room, his grizzled face a mask of disappointment. He stood there for a moment, just watching Jack, as if trying to find the right words. Jack, Walters finally said, his voice heavy. What the hell were you thinking? Jack rubbed his face, feeling the weight of the world pressing down on his shoulders. I don't know, he muttered. I lost control. Walters let out a long sigh, walking over to sit across from him. This is bad, Jack. Real bad. The kid's in the hospital, and there's a video of the whole thing. It's already spreading. Jack's stomach churned at the mention of the video. He hadn't even thought about the fact that people were filming. What are you saying, Tom? What's going to happen? Walters leaned forward, his eyes dark and serious. You're going to be investigated, Jack. There's no getting around it. You assaulted a kid in broad daylight, and it's all over social media. The town's already up in arms. Jack felt the blood drain from his face. But I didn't mean to. Doesn't matter, Walters interrupted. It's out of our hands now. You need a lawyer, and fast. Jack slumped in his seat, the reality of the situation crashing down on him. His career, his life, it was all slipping away, and there was nothing he could do to stop it. The next day, the square in front of the hospital was filled with people. Signs were held high, chants echoed through the streets, and the tension in Willow Creek had reached a boiling point. Leah stood at the edge of the crowd, her body trembling as she watched the scene unfold. Protesters had gathered in support of Malik, demanding justice for what had been done to him. Some carried signs that read, #JusticeForMalik, while others called for Jack's arrest. Leah felt like she was in a nightmare, watching the town divide before her eyes. She wanted to scream, to demand justice for her son, but at the same time, she was paralyzed by the secret she still carried. How could she speak out when the truth would shatter everything? Leah, a voice called out, pulling her from her thoughts. She turned to see Dina, a local activist and friend, making her way through the crowd. You need to speak. The people are listening. They need to hear from Malik's mother. Leah's heart pounded in her chest. She had never wanted to be in the spotlight, but this wasn't about her. It was about Malik. Her son needed her to fight for him. With trembling hands, Leah stepped forward, moving toward the makeshift stage where local leaders were already speaking to the crowd. As she climbed the steps, the sea of faces turned toward her, their eyes filled with expectation. Leah took a deep breath, gripping the microphone tightly. I'm Malik Carter's mother, she began, her voice shaking with emotion. And what happened to my son? It's something no mother should ever have to go through. The crowd grew silent, hanging on her every word. My son is innocent, Leah continued, her voice growing stronger with each word. He did nothing to deserve what was done to him. And yet, he lies in a hospital bed, hurt and scared because of one man's actions. A wave of murmurs rippled through the crowd, but Leah pressed on. I want justice for my son, she said firmly. I want justice for every child in this town who has ever been hurt because of the color of their skin. And I won't stop until we get it. The crowd erupted in cheers, their voices rising in unison, but Leah's heart was still heavy. She had spoken the truth about Malik's innocence, but she hadn't told the full truth. And as she stepped off the stage, she wondered how long she could keep the secret of Jack's paternity buried. Jack sat alone in his car, parked on the outskirts of town, away from the noise and the chaos. His hands gripped the steering wheel tightly, knuckles white with tension. The past few days had been a blur, a whirlwind of accusations, anger, and confusion. The town had turned against him overnight, and now he was the villain in a story he hadn't even realized he was part of. He couldn't stop thinking about Malik. The boy's face haunted him, the way he had looked up at him with a mix of fear and pain. And that name, Malik Carter, it had stirred something deep within him. He hadn't thought about Leah in years, hadn't allowed himself to. But now, the memories came flooding back, the late-night meetings, the secret whispers, the love they had shared and the shame that had followed. Jack slammed his fist against the dashboard, cursing himself. How had he let things get this far? How had he allowed himself to become the man he had always despised? His phone buzzed on the seat next to him, and he glanced down to see his lawyer's name flashing on the screen. Reluctantly, he answered. Jack, the voice on the other end said, I just got off the phone with the DA. They're filing charges. You're going to be arrested. Jack's heart sank, the final nail in the coffin of his career. He had lost everything, his reputation, his job, and now, potentially, his freedom. Thanks, Jack muttered. Hanging up the phone, he stared out at the empty fields in front of him, feeling more lost and alone than ever before. And for the first time in his life, Jack wondered if redemption was even possible. The small kitchen in Leah's home felt colder than usual. The soft morning light filtered through the curtains, casting a faint glow over the table where she sat, staring at the photograph in her hands. The image of her and Jack from so many years ago, back when they had been young, reckless, and foolish enough to think love could conquer everything, looked back at her. Those days felt like they belonged to another life. Her heart ached as she ran her fingers over the edges of the photo. It had been years since she'd let herself think about Jack in anything other than anger. She had buried those memories, locked them away for good reason. But now they were flooding back, unrelenting, forcing her to confront the truth she had kept hidden from everyone, including Malik. Malik was still sleeping in his room, recovering from the physical pain of the attack, but Leah knew the emotional wounds were far deeper. He hadn't asked her about Jack again, but she could see the questions lingering in his eyes, the confusion and hurt he tried to hide. How long could she continue to protect him from the truth? The shrill ring of her phone broke through her thoughts, jolting her out of the memories. She hesitated, glancing at the clock. It was early, too early for most calls. Reluctantly, she picked it up, half expecting it to be another reporter or someone from the community checking in. Leah Carter, she answered, her voice steady but tired. Mrs. Carter, this is John Franklin, the civil rights attorney. I wanted to discuss your case against Officer Marsh. The voice on the other end said, professional and direct. Leah swallowed, her heart racing. She had agreed to meet with the lawyer, but the thought of dragging her and Malik's life into the public eye terrified her. Still, she knew it was the only way to seek justice. For Malik. For herself. I don't know if I'm ready for all of this, she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. There was a pause on the other end. I understand, Mrs. Carter. This won't be easy, but your son deserves justice. And from what I've seen, you have a strong case. Leah bit her lip, glancing toward Malik's bedroom door. Could she really go through with this? Could she take on Jack and the police, knowing what it would cost her son? She closed her eyes, the weight of the decision pressing down on her. Can I think about it a little longer? She asked, feeling torn between her desire to protect Malik and the need to hold Jack accountable. Of course, the lawyer replied. But remember, the longer we wait, the more time they have to build their defense. I'll be here when you're ready. Leah hung up the phone, her heart heavy with indecision. The photograph of her and Jack stared back at her from the table. No matter what she decided, the truth would come out eventually. And when it did, nothing would ever be the same. Jack sat at the bar, nursing a whiskey and staring at the amber liquid in his glass. The low hum of conversations around him and the clinking of glasses provided a strange comfort. It was one of the few places where he could escape, where the weight of what he'd done didn't hang over him like a dark cloud, at least not completely. He downed the rest of his drink in one gulp, wincing as the burn slid down his throat. He signaled to the bartender for another. You okay, man? The bartender asked, eyeing him cautiously as he refilled the glass. Jack grunted, not bothering to respond. He wasn't okay. He wasn't sure if he'd ever be okay again. The image of Malik lying on the ground, hurt and scared, haunted him every time he closed his eyes. And now, the town had turned against him. People he had known for years, some of them his friends, avoided him in the streets, their gazes filled with disgust. His reputation was in ruins. The video of the attack had gone viral, and Jack Marsh, once the proud officer of Willow Creek, was now a national symbol of police brutality. He had been suspended from the force, and his lawyer warned him that criminal charges were inevitable. But none of that compared to the guilt gnawing at his insides. Jack slammed his fist on the bar, drawing a few curious glances from the other patrons. He didn't care. How had his life spiraled so far out of control? He had followed in his father's footsteps, done everything the way he was supposed to. But somewhere along the line, something had gone terribly wrong. The door to the bar swung open, and Jack stiffened as he saw Sheriff Walters walk in. He hadn't seen the sheriff in days, not since the interrogation, and Jack wasn't sure if he was relieved or angry that Walters was there now. The sheriff approached him slowly, his face grim. "Jack," he greeted, taking a seat next to him. Jack nodded, taking a swig of his drink. "Sheriff." There was a long silence between them before Walters spoke again. "You messed up, Jack, and it's only going to get worse." Jack's jaw clenched. He already knew that, but hearing it from the sheriff, the man who had trained him, mentored him, made it sting even more. "I didn't mean for it to happen," Jack muttered, his voice thick with frustration and shame. Walters shook his head. "Doesn't matter. It happened, and now you've got to deal with the fallout." Jack stared at his drink, the weight of his actions pressing down on him. "I don't know how to fix this." "You can't fix it," Walters said bluntly, "but you can start by owning up to it. This town may hate you right now, but if you don't take responsibility, they'll never forgive you. Hell, you might never forgive yourself." Jack's chest tightened. He wasn't sure if forgiveness was even possible, not after what he had done. But as he sat there, staring into his glass, he realized that Walters was right. He had to own up to it, even if it cost him everything. Malik's hospital room was quiet, the steady beep of the heart monitor the only sound breaking the silence. Leah sat by his bed, watching her son sleep. His face was peaceful, but she could see the bruises along his jaw and the bandage around his head where he had been struck. Her heart broke all over again. She had spent every moment by his side since the attack, unwilling to leave him alone for even a second. But in those long, quiet hours, her mind had raced with thoughts she had been avoiding for years. Thoughts about Jack, about the secret she had kept from Malik, and about how it all could unravel now that Jack had re-entered their lives in such a horrible way. Malik stirred slightly, his eyes fluttering open. Leah leaned forward, brushing a hand over his forehead. "Hey, baby," she whispered. "How are you feeling?" Malik blinked, still groggy from sleep. "I'm okay, Mom. Just tired." Leah forced a smile, but inside, her chest ached. "You've been through a lot," she said gently. "You need to rest." Malik was silent for a moment, his eyes drifting toward the window, where the soft light of the setting sun filtered through. Then, he turned to her, his voice small. "Mom, why did he do it? That cop, why did he hurt me?" Leah's breath caught in her throat. This was the question she had been dreading, the one she wasn't sure how to answer. She swallowed hard, her mind racing for the right words, but nothing felt right. "I don't know, baby," she finally said, her voice shaky. "I don't know why." Malik frowned, his eyes searching hers for something. Answers, comfort, something she wasn't sure she could give him. "It's not fair," he whispered. "I didn't do anything wrong." "I know," Leah said, her voice cracking with emotion. "I know, Malik. You didn't do anything wrong." But even as she spoke the words, Leah knew there was more to the story. The truth was sitting there between them, unspoken, but growing heavier with each passing moment. And one day, Malik would have to know. He would have to learn that the man who had hurt him was the same man she had once loved, the same man who was his father. That night, Leah stood by the window in her living room, staring out into the darkened street. The lawyer's words echoed in her mind. They had a strong case. They could take Jack to court, demand justice for Malik. But it would mean exposing everything, every secret, every lie, every part of her past with Jack. She took a deep breath, her hands trembling as she gripped the edge of the windowsill. She couldn't hide the truth forever. Malik deserved to know who his father was, even if it shattered his world. And maybe, just maybe, it was time for her to confront her past as well. The decision weighed heavily on her, but Leah knew what she had to do. Tomorrow, she would call the lawyer. Tomorrow, she would fight for her son. And tomorrow, she would face Jack. There was no turning back now.